Want to know what it feels like to watch 3 people get sentenced to federal prison? Let me tell you, it feels like justice. Like watching the universe finally correct itself after years of being tilted in the wrong direction. My stepmother, my stepbrother, and the lawyer they bribed to forge my dead father's will, all standing in front of a judge, listening to 15-year sentences being handed down one by one, watching their faces drain of color as the bailiffs moved forward with handcuffs. They'd stolen $2.7 million from me. Money my father spent 30 years building. Money he explicitly left to me in a will they destroyed and replaced with a fake one. They thought they'd gotten away with it. For 3 years, they lived in mansions I should have inherited, drove cars my money paid for, took vacations funded by my father's life's work. But here's what they didn't know. I'm not the broken, grieving kid they manipulated. I'm a lawyer, and I spent those 3 years building an airtight case that would bury them so deep they'd never see daylight again. This is that story. If you've ever had someone steal from you, if you've ever felt powerless watching terrible people get away with terrible things, if you've ever fantasized about karma finally showing up and delivering the justice the universe owed you, then you need to hear this story. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications because what you're about to hear is the most satisfying legal revenge story you'll encounter today. This one's got twists, turns, and an ending so perfect, it'll give you chills. Let's go back to where this nightmare started. My father died on a Tuesday. Unexpected heart attack. 58 years old. Healthy, active, no warning signs. Just gone. One moment he was alive, planning our fishing trip for the weekend, texting me terrible dad jokes. The next moment, paramedics were telling me there was nothing they could do. The grief was instantaneous and suffocating. That crushing weight on your chest that makes every breath feel impossible. That surreal fog where nothing seems real. Where you keep expecting to wake up and find out it was all a nightmare. But this was real, and it was only the beginning of my nightmare. Let me give you some context. My mom died when I was 7. Cancer. The slow, brutal kind that takes everything from you piece by piece. After she passed, it was just me and Dad for years. He worked himself to the bone building his commercial real estate business, but he always made time for me. Little league games, helping with homework, teaching me to drive, walking me through my first heartbreak. He was my everything. When I was 15, he met her. The woman who would eventually destroy everything he'd built. She was charming, I guess, at first. Showed interest in me, asked about school, complimented the dinner I'd made. Dad was lonely, and she paid attention to him in ways he hadn't experienced since Mom died. I wanted him to be happy, so I tried to be supportive. They got married within a year. She came with a son, 2 years older than me, and from day one he made it clear he thought I was an inconvenience. The real family was him and his mother. I was just the leftover kid from the previous marriage taking up space in their house. Dad tried to blend the family. Family dinners, vacations, game nights. But there was always this tension. This underlying current of resentment from both of them. Like they were tolerating me, waiting for me to age out so they could have Dad to themselves. I went to college across the country partially to escape it. Studied pre-law, then law school, passed the bar exam 3 years before Dad died. We stayed close despite the distance. Weekly phone calls, visits during holidays, texts throughout the week. He was proud of me. Told me constantly, the stepfamily? They stayed civil when Dad was around, but I caught the looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The way she'd casually mention how much my education was costing. How much of their money was going toward my fancy law degree. Never mind that. Dad had set up a college fund for me before she even entered the picture. After I graduated and started working at a firm in Chicago, Dad talked about updating his will. He'd mentioned it several times, actually. Wanted to make sure everything was in order and fair to everyone. I told him not to worry about it, that he had decades ahead of him, that we'd deal with estate planning when he was old and gray. We never got that chance. The funeral was a blur. Standing at the gravesite, watching them lower my father into the ground while relatives I barely remembered offered hollow condolences. She was there, playing the grieving widow perfectly. Black dress, tissues dabbing at dry eyes, accepting sympathy like she'd actually loved him. The stepbrother stood beside her, stone-faced, already checking his phone during the service. 3 days after the funeral, we met with the lawyer, Dad's lawyer supposedly, a man I'd never met, never heard mentioned. Dad had used the same attorney for 20 years, a family friend named Robert who'd helped him with everything from business contracts to his divorce from his first wife after she'd cheated on him. Wait, no, Dad never divorced, Mom died. See how grief messes with your head? This new lawyer was younger, slick, had that used car salesman energy that immediately set off alarm bells. But I was grieving, exhausted, not thinking clearly. I just wanted to get through the reading of the will and go home to cry in peace. He opened the folder with practiced efficiency. This is the last will and testament of Richard Morrison, executed 6 months ago and properly witnessed according to state law. 6 months ago. When had Dad updated his will? Why hadn't he mentioned it? The lawyer began reading. Standard opening language. Then the distributions. To my beloved wife, I leave the family home, all contents therein, and 40% of my total estate. Okay, reasonable, I guess. They'd been married for 12 years. To my stepson, I leave 30% of my total estate, as well as the controlling interest in Morrison Commercial Properties. My stomach dropped. The business, Dad's business, the thing he'd built from nothing, that he'd always said would be mine someday. He'd promised, explicitly promised. And to my daughter, I leave 30% of my total estate. 30%. I was getting 30% while my stepbrother, who'd never worked a day in that business, who barely spoke to my father, who'd openly mocked Dad's work ethic, got the company. The room tilted. My hands gripped the arms of the chair so hard my knuckles went white. There must be a mistake, I managed to say. My father wouldn't. He always said the business would be mine. He told me that a dozen times. The lawyer gave me this pitying look. I understand this is difficult. Grief can make us remember things differently than they were, but I assure you, this is your father's will, properly executed and legally binding. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Sweetheart, your father wanted to be fair to everyone. You have your career. Your stepbrother needs something to build his future on. The condescension in her voice made my blood boil. When did he execute this will? I want to see the documentation, the witness signatures, everything. The lawyer's expression hardened slightly. You're welcome to review the documents, but I assure you everything is in order. Your father was of sound mind and body when he made these decisions. Something was wrong. Every instinct I'd developed in law school was screaming at me. But I was outnumbered, grief-stricken, and frankly, too destroyed to fight in that moment. I requested copies of everything. The lawyer said he'd send them to my office. Walking out of that conference room felt like walking through quicksand. The stepfamily stayed behind, probably celebrating, though they had the decency to wait until I was gone. That night, alone in my hotel room, I did what any lawyer would do. I started digging. The documents arrived at my office 4 days later. I cleared my entire schedule, told my boss I needed a few personal days, locked myself in my apartment with the will, 2 pots of coffee, and a determination to find answers. First red flag. The signature. I'd seen my father's signature thousands of times. Birthday cards, permission slips, checks, legal documents. I knew every loop, every slant, every quirk of his handwriting. This signature was close, very close. But the capital R was slightly off. The way the M connected to the O wasn't quite right. If you weren't looking for it, you'd never notice. But I was looking. Second red flag, the witnesses. The will required 2 witnesses to be valid. The signatures on the document belonged to a Jennifer Martinez and David Chen, names I'd never heard. Not family friends, not business associates, not anyone from Dad's life that I recognized. I ran their names through every database I had access to. Jennifer Martinez. No hits in the state. No social media presence. No property records. Nothing. David Chen. Same story. It was like these people didn't exist. Fake witnesses. Third red flag. The lawyer himself. I looked up his credentials. Leonard Westfield, attorney at law. Licensed to practice, sure. But when I dug deeper into his background, I found something interesting. He'd been censured twice by the state bar for ethical violations. Once for mishandling client funds, once for conflicts of interest. Not the kind of attorney my father, who was meticulous about vetting professionals, would ever hire. Fourth red flag. The timing. The will was allegedly executed 6 months before Dad died. I pulled out my calendar, looked at the date. March 15th. I knew exactly where I'd been that day, visiting Dad for spring break. We'd spent the entire week together, fishing, watching basketball, organizing his garage. He'd never mentioned meeting with a lawyer, never said anything about updating his will. If he'd executed such an important document, he would have told me. He told me everything. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. This will was fake. They'd forged it. But knowing something and proving it in court are two entirely different things. I needed evidence. Hard, undeniable evidence that would stand up under legal scrutiny. I started with the original will. Dad had always kept important documents in his home office, in a fireproof safe behind a painting of a mountain landscape. I knew the combination, my birthday. He'd told me years ago in case anything ever happened to him. But getting access to that safe meant getting into the house that now belonged to her. I called, put on my best grieving daughter voice. Hi, it's me. I was hoping I could come by and go through some of Dad's things. For sentimental reasons. His watch, maybe some photos, his fishing gear. If that's okay? There was a pause. I could practically hear her calculating, trying to figure out if this was a trap. Of course, sweetie. Family is important. Come by tomorrow afternoon. We'll be out, but I'll leave the key under the mat. Too easy. Way too easy. But I wasn't about to question my luck. The next day, I drove to the house I'd grown up in. The house that should have been mine. Walking up that driveway felt surreal, like visiting a grave, like stepping into a memory that didn't want me there anymore. The key was under the mat, just like she'd promised. I let myself in. The place had already changed. Her decorations, her furniture, her energy filling spaces where my father's presence used to be. Photos of me and Dad had been removed from the walls, replaced with pictures of her and her son. It was like they were erasing him. Erasing us. I went straight to the office. The painting was still there. Dad's beloved mountain landscape, the one he'd bought during a trip to Colorado the year before Mom died. I lifted it carefully off the wall. The safe was exactly where I remembered. I entered the combination, held my breath. It clicked open. Inside, business documents, property deeds, stock certificates, and there, in a manila folder labeled Estate Planning, the original will. My hands shook as I pulled it out. This will was dated 15 years ago, shortly after he'd married her. Different lawyer, Robert Harris, the family friend I'd remembered. Different terms, entirely. According to this document, the house would be split 50-50 between me and his wife. The business would go entirely to me. Liquid assets would be divided, 60% to me, 40% to her. Nothing to the stepbrother. This was the real will. I knew it in my bones. I pulled out my phone and photographed every single page. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it, closed the safe, rehung the painting. As I was leaving the office, I heard a sound. The front door opening. They were home early. My heart stopped. If they caught me here, found out I'd accessed the safe, they'd know I was onto them. They'd destroy evidence, cover their tracks, make everything infinitely harder to prove. I heard her voice from the foyer. I'm telling you, she's up to something. Coming here for sentimental items? Please, she's looking for something. The stepbrother's voice. Let her look. There's nothing to find. The old man's will is airtight. You better be right, because if this falls apart, we're all going to prison. My blood turned to ice, so they knew. They all knew. This wasn't incompetence or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated fraud, conspiracy, multiple felonies. They were moving deeper into the house. I was trapped in the office with no clear exit unless I wanted to walk right past them. The window. Dad's office was on the first floor, facing the backyard. I crossed the room as quietly as possible, unlocked the window and slid it open. The screen popped out with a soft click that sounded deafening in the silent house. I climbed through, dropped into the garden bed below, and ran. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Here's what people don't understand about the legal system. You need overwhelming evidence before you make accusations, especially against people who've managed to deceive probate court. Go in half-cocked with a weak case, and they'll lawyer up, destroy evidence, and turn it into a he said, she said that you'll lose. I needed to build a case so airtight that no lawyer in the country could poke holes in it. Step 1. Forensic document analysis. I contacted a handwriting expert I'd worked with on a case at my firm, someone who'd testified in federal court, whose credentials were impeccable. I sent him high-resolution scans of both wills, focusing on the signatures. His analysis came back 3 days later. Inconsistent pen pressure, unnatural hesitation marks, deviation in letter formation. In my professional opinion, the signature on the second will is a simulation, an attempted forgery. Boom. Expert testimony. Step 2. Track down the real lawyer. Robert Harris, Dad's actual attorney, had retired 2 years ago. Moved to Arizona for the weather and the golf courses. I found his contact information through the State Bar Association and called him. Mr. Harris, this is name redacted, Richard Morrison's daughter. I'm calling about my father's estate. Oh my God. I was so sorry to hear about Richard. Your father was a good man, one of the best clients I ever had. Thank you. I need to ask you something important. Did my father ever execute a new will after the one you drafted 15 years ago? Silence. A new will? No. Absolutely not. The last time I spoke with Richard was about 8 months before he passed. He called asking about updating some beneficiary designations on his life insurance, but we never touched the will. He was happy with the existing document. Why do you ask? I explained the situation, the fake will, the forged signature, the impossible witnesses, the sleazy lawyer with ethical violations. By the time I finished, Harris was furious. That's fraud. That's criminal fraud. You need to report this immediately. I will, but I need my case to be bulletproof first. Would you be willing to testify about the original will? About Dad's intentions? Absolutely. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure your father's actual wishes are honored. And if those people think they can get away with stealing from a dead man's daughter, they've got another thing coming. Step 3. Investigate the fake lawyer. Leonard Westfield had an office in a strip mall between a nail salon and a payday loan place. Not exactly the setup of a respected estate planning attorney. I drove by one afternoon, scoping it out, trying to decide my next move. That's when I saw him, coming out of the office with the stepbrother, laughing, shaking hands, looking extremely friendly for a supposed attorney-client relationship. I took photos, video, documented everything. Then I did something risky. I called his office and scheduled a consultation under a fake name. I need help with estate planning, I told the receptionist. Something discreet. My family situation is complicated. The appointment was set for the following week. When I walked into that office, Westfield didn't recognize me. Why would he? He'd met me exactly once at the will reading, when I was a grieving mess barely holding it together. Now I wore different clothes, styled my hair differently, wore glasses I didn't need. Ms. Thompson, thank you for coming in. You mentioned a complicated family situation? I fed him a story. Wealthy parent, difficult siblings, wanting to make sure certain people were excluded from the will. And then I asked the magic question. If someone, hypothetically, wanted to create a will that maybe didn't reflect what the person actually wanted, but looked legitimate, could that be done? His expression shifted, became calculating. That's a very unusual question. I'm willing to pay well for unusual services. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. And then, I swear I couldn't believe my luck. He smiled. Everything we discuss here is confidential, attorney-client privilege. So, hypothetically speaking, yes, such documents could be created. For the right price. I had him. The entire conversation was being recorded on my phone, sitting in my purse with the recorder app running. Single-party consent state, completely legal. He kept talking, digging himself deeper, explaining his process, how he'd done it before for clients with complex needs, how much it would cost, how he'd provide witnesses for an additional fee. I thanked him, said I needed to think about it, and left. Step 4. Financial records. I filed a request with the probate court for a full accounting of the estate. As a named beneficiary, I had legal standing to demand transparency about where the money had gone. The response came back 2 weeks later, and it was worse than I'd imagined. In the 3 years since Dad's death, they'd burned through nearly half the estate. The business was being run into the ground, clients leaving, contracts unfulfilled, the stepbrother making disastrous decisions that were destroying Dad's 30-year legacy. The house had been refinanced twice. Luxury purchases everywhere. Cars, jewelry, a boat they'd bought and used once. They were spending my inheritance like lottery winners with no concept of the future. Step 5. Put it all together. I spent 3 months compiling everything into a comprehensive report. Handwriting analysis proving the signature was forged. Testimony from the original lawyer confirming Dad never executed a new will. Evidence that the witnesses on the fake will didn't exist. Recorded confession from Westfield admitting to creating fraudulent documents. Financial. Records showing the suspicious spending. Photos and evidence of the conspiracy between all 3 parties. I took everything to the district attorney's office. Not just any prosecutor. I researched and found the one who specialized in white-collar crime, the one with a reputation for being ruthless with fraudsters. Her name was Patricia Chen. 45 years old, former FBI agent, had a 92% conviction rate. I walked into her office with 3 banker boxes full of evidence. Ms. Chen, my name is redacted. My stepfamily stole my inheritance through will forgery and estate fraud, and I have everything you need to send them to prison. She looked at the boxes, then at me. Start talking. Patricia Chen was everything I'd hoped for and more. She listened to my entire story without interrupting, reviewed my evidence with the sharp focus of someone who'd seen every con in the book. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said the words I'd been desperate to hear. This is prosecutable, very prosecutable. The investigation moved faster than I'd expected. Chen's team executed search warrants on Westfield's office, the stepfamily's home, and their bank records. They found everything I'd suspected and more. Email chains between the stepmother and Westfield, discussing how to handle the daughter problem. Text messages between her and the stepbrother, strategizing about keeping me in the dark. A paper trail showing Westfield had been paid $75,000 for his services, money that came directly from Dad's estate account. But the most damning evidence? They found the original will in the stepmother's bedroom closet, hidden inside a lockbox under a pile of sweaters. She'd kept it. The idiots had actually kept the evidence of their crime instead of destroying it. Chen theorized they'd held on to it as insurance, maybe planning to use it to negotiate if things ever went sideways. Or maybe they were just arrogant enough to think they'd never get caught. Either way, it sealed their fate. The DA's office brought charges against all three. Forgery, in the first degree, criminal conspiracy, theft by deception, estate, fraud, obstruction of justice. Each count carried serious prison time. When the indictments came down, I was sitting in Chen's office. She'd called me in to give me the news personally. We're moving forward with prosecution. Full force. These people are going down. The relief was overwhelming. 3 years of grief, anger, and helplessness finally crystallizing into action, into justice. What happens now? I asked. Now? Now we give them a chance to take a plea deal. Based on the evidence, I'm guessing they'll try to negotiate. But I'm not offering much. They committed serious crimes and they're going to face serious consequences. What kind of plea deal are we talking about? 10 to 12 years, probably. If they're smart. I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. No deals. I want a trial. Chen raised an eyebrow. Trials are risky. Juries are unpredictable. A plea deal guarantees prison time. I don't want guaranteed prison time. I want them to sit in that courtroom and have every lie, every manipulation, every stolen dollar exposed in public. I want them to hear witness after witness testify about what they did. I want them to feel the weight of their choices pressing down until they can't breathe. And then I want a jury to send them away for as long as legally possible. She smiled. Then that's what we'll do. The next 6 months were a blur of depositions, pretrial motions, and preparation. The defense tried everything. Motions to suppress evidence, motions to dismiss, attempts to discredit witnesses. All denied. They even tried to claim I'd orchestrated the whole thing out of jealousy and greed. That I'd fabricated evidence because I was angry about not getting everything. That theory lasted exactly as long as it took for the handwriting expert and the original lawyer to testify. The trial was set for November. The courtroom was packed. Family members, curious onlookers, a few journalists who'd gotten wind of the case. The gallery buzzed with anticipation. Estate fraud cases that actually went to trial were rare enough. Ones with this much evidence and drama were practically unicorns. The 3 defendants sat at the defense table looking exactly like you'd expect. The stepmother wore a conservative dress and minimal makeup, trying to play the sympathetic widow. The stepbrother wore a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, bought with my money, undoubtedly. Westfield looked nervous, sweating despite the courthouse air conditioning. Good. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Chen herself. She walked the jury through the timeline. Dad's death, the suspicious will, the forged signature, the fake witnesses, the conspiracy to defraud. She laid it out like a story, simple and compelling. The defendants thought they were clever. They thought they could steal millions of dollars and get away with it because the victim was dead and couldn't defend himself. But they made one critical miscalculation. They underestimated his daughter. And now they're going to pay the price for that mistake. The defense's opening statement tried to paint a picture of a blended family torn apart by greed, my greed specifically. That I was a bitter stepdaughter who'd never accepted the stepfamily and was now using my legal training to punish them. The jury looked skeptical. Over the next 2 weeks, Chen called witness after witness. The handwriting expert testified about the forged signature, using blown-up exhibits that showed the tiny inconsistencies. Under cross-examination, he was unshakable. 20 years of experience, testified in over 200 cases, never had his analysis overturned on appeal. The original lawyer testified about Dad's intentions, about the real will, about the fact that Dad had never contacted him about changes. He was grandfatherly, genuine, completely credible. Several jurors were nodding along as he spoke. The forensic accountant walked through the financial records, showing exactly how much money had been stolen and how it had been spent. The jury looked increasingly disturbed as the numbers climbed higher and higher. But the most devastating testimony came from Westfield's former secretary. Turned out, she'd quit 6 months after helping with the fake will because her conscience couldn't handle it. She'd kept copies of everything as insurance, afraid Westfield might try to pin the crime on her. When investigators approached her, she cooperated fully in exchange for immunity. She testified about watching Westfield practice forging Dad's signature, about the fake witnesses who were actually friends of his that he'd paid to sign documents they'd never seen, about the meetings between Westfield and the stepfamily where they'd planned every detail of the fraud. The defense tried to discredit her, paint her as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. But she had documentation, emails, calendar entries. Everything corroborated her story. And then came the recording. Chen played the audio of my consultation with Westfield, where he'd admitted to creating fraudulent documents for the right price. The courtroom went silent as his voice filled the space, explaining exactly how he'd commit fraud. The defense objected, argued it was entrapment, argued it was taken out of context. Judge denied it all. Single-party consent recording in a conversation where an attorney admitted to criminal activity. Completely admissible. By the time the prosecution rested, the defense looked shell-shocked. They put up a weak case. Character witnesses who were clearly uncomfortable lying under oath. The stepmother took the stand and gave a tearful testimony about how much she'd loved Dad, how she was just following what she thought were his wishes. The cross-examination destroyed her. Chen pulled out email after email showing her conspiring with Westfield, showed bank records of her paying him, confronted her with the fact that she'd kept the original will hidden in her closet. If she'd really believed the fake will was legitimate, why hide the original? She had no answer. The stepbrother didn't even testify. His lawyer advised against it, probably because any competent prosecutor would have eviscerated him on cross. Closing arguments were powerful. Chen summarized the evidence, connected all the dots, and made an appeal to the jury's sense of justice. Richard Morrison worked his entire life to build something meaningful, to leave a legacy for his daughter. These 3 people stole that legacy because they thought they deserved it more. They forged documents, created fake witnesses, and committed fraud to steal millions of dollars. And now you have the power to hold them accountable. The defense's closing was desperate, throwing anything at the wall hoping something would stick, suggesting reasonable doubt where none existed, trying to make the jury sympathize with the defendants. It didn't work. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the 4 women stood and delivered the verdicts. Count 1, forgery in the 1st degree, guilty. Count 2, criminal conspiracy, guilty. Count 3, theft by deception, guilty. Count 4, estate fraud, guilty. Count 5, obstruction of justice, guilty, guilty. On every single count, all 3 defendants. The stepmother started crying. The stepbrother sat stone-faced, probably in shock. Westfield actually looked like he might vomit. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks later. Sentencing day arrived on a cold January morning. The courtroom was even more packed than it had been during the trial. Word had spread about the case, and people wanted to see how it ended. I sat in the front row, right behind the prosecution table, close enough to see their faces when the sentences came down. The judge called the court to order. The defendants have been found guilty by a jury of their peers on all counts. This was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, premeditated fraud carried out over an extended period of time. The defendants conspired to rob a grieving daughter of her rightful inheritance and showed no remorse until they were caught. He looked directly at them. You stole $2.7 million. You forged legal documents. You corrupted the probate process. You dishonored the memory of a good man who trusted you. And you did it all because you were greedy. The stepmother was sobbing. The stepbrother was pale. Westfield looked like he'd aged 10 years since the trial began. Before I impose sentence, does anyone wish to address the court? Chen looked at me, one eyebrow raised in question. We'd discussed this. Victim impact statements weren't required. but they were powerful. I stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to say something." The judge nodded. "Proceed." I walked to the podium, my prepared statement shaking slightly in my hands. But when I looked at the three of them sitting there, I put the paper down. This needed to come from the heart. My father was the best man I've ever known. When my mom died, he could have fallen apart. Instead, he worked harder than ever to make sure I had everything I needed. He taught me about integrity, about hard work, about treating people with respect and dignity. He built a successful business not by cutting corners or taking shortcuts, but by being honest and reliable. I looked directly at the stepmother. "You married him, and I tried to welcome you into our family. I tried to build a relationship with you and your son. I wanted my father to be happy, and you repaid that by stealing everything he worked for, by destroying his legacy, by spitting on his memory." My voice cracked, but I pushed through. "The money? I can recover from losing money. But you tried to take something more precious than that. You tried to take away my father's final act of love, providing for me after he was gone. You tried to erase his intentions, his wishes, his legacy, and that's unforgivable." I turned to the judge. "These people aren't sorry they committed fraud. They're sorry they got caught. If I hadn't investigated, if I hadn't built this case, they'd still be living in luxury on stolen money, laughing about how they'd fooled everyone. They don't deserve leniency. They deserve every year of the maximum sentence." The courtroom was silent. I sat down. The judge took a moment, then began sentencing. "Leonard Westfield, as an attorney, you held a position of trust. You violated that trust in the worst possible way. For your crimes, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are hereby disbarred and will never practice law again." Westfield dropped his head into his hands. "Stepbrother's name. You participated in a conspiracy to defraud the daughter of a man who welcomed you into his home. For your crimes, I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release." The stepbrother finally showed emotion, anger. He glared at me like this was somehow my fault. "And stepmother's name, you were married to the victim. You stood beside him, pretended to love him, and then dishonored his memory by stealing from his only child. For your crimes, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release." She let out a wail that echoed through the courtroom. Additionally, all defendants are ordered to pay full restitution to the victim in the amount of $2.7 million, plus interest and court costs. All assets currently in their possession obtained through the fraud are to be seized and liquidated to satisfy this debt. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned. Bailiffs moved forward with handcuffs. The stepmother was still crying, begging for mercy that wasn't coming. The stepbrother struggled slightly, earning himself a firmer grip from the officer. Westfield went quietly, like a man who knew he deserved every second of what was coming. And I watched them being led away. Watched them disappear through the door that would lead to prison transport. Watched 3 people who'd tried to destroy me finally face the consequences of their actions. Chen came over and shook my hand. "Congratulations. That's as close to a perfect outcome as you'll ever see in a courtroom. Thank you for everything, for believing me, for fighting for this. I believe the evidence. You did the hard work. Most people would have given up or accepted the situation. You didn't? You fought back." She smiled. "Your father would be proud." Those words hit harder than I expected. My eyes filled with tears. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, they weren't tears of anger or frustration. They were tears of relief. The legal battle wasn't completely over, but the hard part was done. Over the next 6 months, I worked with the court-appointed trustee to liquidate their assets and recover my inheritance. The house, my childhood home, was sold. The luxury cars, the boat, the jewelry, all of it went to auction. The business, which had been run into the ground, was sold to a competitor for a fraction of what it was worth when Dad died. In total, we recovered about $1.8 million of the original $2.7. The rest had been spent, wasted, burned through in 3 years of reckless living, gone forever. But honestly, the money stopped being the point somewhere along the way. This had become about something bigger. About justice, about making sure terrible people couldn't just take whatever they wanted from whoever they wanted without consequences. About proving that even when the system seems rigged, even when the odds are stacked against you, truth and persistence can still win. I used part of the recovered money to pay off my law school loans, invested another chunk, and then I did something that would have made Dad proud. I started a legal aid foundation in his name, the Morrison Foundation for Estate Justice. We provide free legal services to people who've been defrauded by family members, who've had inheritances stolen, who don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back against people who exploit the probate system. Because here's what I learned. This happens all the time. Elder abuse, will tampering, estate fraud, it's shockingly common. And most victims don't have a law degree or the time and money to pursue justice. They just lose. The bad guys win because the system is complicated and expensive and exhausting. I wanted to change that. In the 3 years since the foundation launched, we've helped 67 families recover stolen assets. We've prosecuted 14 cases of estate fraud. We've educated thousands of people about protecting their inheritances and spotting red flags. Every time we win a case, I think about Dad, about how he taught me to stand up for what's right. To fight for people who can't fight for themselves, to never accept injustice just because it's easier. The foundation became my way of turning the worst experience of my life into something meaningful. Something that helps people, something that makes sure my father's death, and the nightmare that followed, wasn't for nothing. As for the 3 people who tried to destroy me, Westfield is currently serving his sentence at a federal corrections facility in Pennsylvania. According to my occasional check-ins with the Bureau of Prisons website, his earliest possible release date is 2033. He'll be 68 years old. His law license is permanently revoked. His reputation is destroyed. Even if he gets out early for good behavior, he'll never practice law again. Never be trusted with anything important. Never recover from being known as the crooked lawyer who forged a dead man's will. The stepbrother is at a different facility in Ohio. He's apparently had a rough time in prison. Turns out, his entitled attitude doesn't play well with other inmates. He's been in segregation twice for disciplinary issues. His release date is 2034, assuming he doesn't add time with his behavior. He'll be 47 when he gets out. No college degree, no work experience, no connections, and a federal fraud conviction on his record. The future he was trying to steal from me, he destroyed his own instead. The stepmother is serving her sentence at a women's facility in West Virginia. According to the prison records, she's been a model prisoner, probably because she finally realized that playing by the rules is less painful than the alternative. Her release date is 2037. She'll be 63. Everything she stole, everything she thought she'd secured for herself, gone. Her son will be out of prison before her. She'll have no home to return to, no money saved, no husband to support her. She'll start over with nothing, just like she tried to leave me. The irony is almost poetic. They took my inheritance, so I took their freedom. 15 years for 2 of them, 12 for the other. That's time they'll never get back. Birthdays, holidays, life milestones, all spent behind bars, because they couldn't resist the temptation to steal from a grieving daughter. Sometimes, people ask me if I feel guilty about sending them to prison for so long. The answer is no. Not even a little bit. They made their choices. They forged documents. They conspired to commit fraud. They stole millions of dollars. They looked me in the eye at that will reading and lied without hesitation. Those were active, deliberate choices they made over and over again for 3 years. I just held them accountable. That's not revenge in the vindictive sense. That's justice. That's the legal system working exactly as it's supposed to work. That's consequences for actions. That's what happens when you commit serious crimes and get caught. Do I wish things had been different? Obviously, I wish my father hadn't died so young. I wish the stepfamily had been honest. I wish I'd inherited what Dad wanted me to have without having to fight for it in court. But given the circumstances they created, given the choices they made, I don't regret a single action I took. Not the investigation, not the prosecution, not the victim impact statement that probably added years to their sentences. They earned every second of prison time they're serving. You know what's strange? For years after Dad died, I had this recurring nightmare. I'd dream that I was at his funeral again. watching them lower him into the ground. But in the dream, I could see him through the coffin, and he was trying to tell me something, trying to warn me, but I couldn't hear him. I'd wake up in a panic, feeling like I'd failed him somehow. The nightmares stopped after the sentencing. I think, on some level, my subconscious knew that justice hadn't been served yet, that there was still a wrong that needed to be righted. Once the three of them were behind bars, once Dad's true will had been honored, once his legacy was protected, the nightmares just stopped. I finally felt like I could rest, like he could rest. If I could go back and give advice to myself the day I walked out of that will reading, confused, devastated, knowing something was wrong but not sure what to do about it, here's what I'd say. Trust your instincts. When something feels off, it probably is. Don't let people gaslight you into ignoring that inner voice that's screaming, "This isn't right." Document everything. Every conversation, every document, every interaction. You never know what will become crucial evidence later. Don't give up when the odds seem impossible. The system is complicated and intimidating, but it can work if you're persistent and strategic. Ask for help from experts. I couldn't have built this case alone. The handwriting analyst, the forensic accountant, the prosecutor, all of them were essential. Don't be too proud to admit when you need specialized knowledge. Patience is power. I wanted to confront them immediately after finding the forged will, but rushing in would have given them time to cover their tracks. Waiting, planning, building an airtight case. That's what won the day. And maybe most importantly, your worth isn't determined by what people try to take from you. They tried to rob me of my inheritance, but they couldn't rob me of my intelligence, my determination, my integrity, or my father's love. Those things were always mine, regardless of what happened with the money. The Morrison Foundation keeps me busy now. Between running that and my regular legal practice, I don't have much downtime, but I like it that way. Purpose is powerful medicine for old wounds. I'm still single. Trust issues take time to work through, turns out. But I'm okay with that. I've built a life I'm proud of, a life Dad would be proud of, and that's enough for now. I visit his grave every few months. Bring flowers, sit with him, tell him about the foundation, about the cases we've won, about the people we've helped. I like to think he knows that somehow, wherever he is, he's aware that his death wasn't the end of his legacy, that his daughter fought for him, that justice was served. Last time I was there, I noticed someone had left a small stone on his headstone, a Jewish tradition of showing respect. I don't know who left it, but it made me smile. Even in death, even years later, people remembered him as someone worth honoring. That's the real inheritance he left me. Not money, not property, but values, integrity, the courage to fight for what's right even when it's hard, the refusal to accept injustice just because it's easier. They tried to steal my inheritance, but the most valuable parts were never theirs to take. So that's the story. The stepfamily that tried to rob me blind, the forged will that almost worked, the 3-year investigation that brought them down, the 15-year prison sentences that made sure they'd never hurt anyone else. Was it worth it? Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every hour spent building the case? Absolutely, because some things are worth fighting for. Your father's legacy, your own dignity, the principle that terrible people shouldn't get to win just because they're willing to lie and cheat. And honestly, knowing that they're sitting in prison cells right now, probably regretting every choice that led them there, while I'm out here living my best life and helping other people avoid the same fate, that's not just revenge, that's poetry. So what do you think? Did they get what they deserved, or was 15 years too harsh? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your perspective. Have you ever dealt with estate fraud? Has a family member ever stolen from you? If this story gave you chills, if it made you want to stand up and cheer, absolutely demolish that like button. Subscribe if you want more stories about people who refused to be victims, who fought back against injustice, who proved that sometimes karma needs a little help from the legal system. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And share this with anyone who's ever been betrayed by family, who's ever had to fight for what was rightfully theirs, who needs to know that justice is still possible. Remember, the best revenge isn't just getting even. It's making sure they can never hurt anyone else again. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, trust your instincts, fight for what's right, and never underestimate the power of a well-built legal case.